Fantastic. Cool. All right. Hey again. Hey, we're starting our next hard conversation. And today we are going to get into class, social economic class, status, all that. And we had already had a little bit of conversation around this before, which is kind of prompting some of the questions that I'm going to ask to um, prompt how we go with this, because I've been thinking a lot about some of the things that you mentioned, and kind of like what are the things that I am not taking into consideration, or how is this fitting into to myself, and how I'm seeing the world, and like those limitations there. So I'm just kind of going to give like a little bit of context of like what I was thinking about. Is I think with a lot of these identities, right? Like class, with as with everything else, there's a common theme, for myself for sure, and I think with a lot of other folks too who are in positions of privilege, where this relationship with privilege can be very problematic, right? Like, do we explore that privilege enough? How do we manage that exploration for ourselves, and then how do we translate that into behaviors in the world, right, and in our relationship with other people? And I think with that privilege, I think there's like a lot of guilt, right? That theme of guilt, that theme of how do I overcome that for myself, or how do I deal with that for myself? So um, I'll share this as like an anecdote, as a starting point. But I was trying to think of like one of the ways that I am thinking about this is, I remember when I was younger, my dad lives in the San Francisco Bay Area. In San Francisco, there's a large houseless population in San Francisco. Like there's a lot of folks, like there's lots of economic inequality. Um, and so a lot of people might think like, oh, like very liberal city, very, people might even say very progressive and everything like that. And at the same time, you can walk down Market Street and you literally see on one side, if you're looking at like, there's almost like this triangle, right, where the road forks, and you can see on one side is like the business district and people in suits, and like just like Starbucks on like, like across the street from each other, like two Starbucks. And then on the other side, like literally looking down the other side of the street, seeing folks on, who are like sleeping on the street. And so just this very, very stark inequality. And I remember being in that environment, and my urge to give to people right on the street. But one of the things that I was struggling with was my own sort of feelings around class and my own privilege, and thinking, what is my urge to give motivated by? Like, is it motivated by actual compassion? Is it motivated by, like, what is the intent and what is the impact of my giving? Is this actually helping? Is this actually good? And am I doing this for the right reasons? Is this motivated by guilt? And am I doing this only for myself, in a sense? So there's a lot of, and like almost in a sense, like your own desire to feel superior. There's like that theme of like that savior complex and things like that. So I guess like I'm just kind of sharing that as a starting point, but like, because we've started having some conversations about our economic privileges, but then also I think because of the intersection between, I think you've shared multiple times that like you have economic privilege, and at the same time you also have that intersection with so many other identities that give you so much more perspective on navigating that. And so I guess my question is, how do we navigate privilege, right? Like, how do we navigate our economic privilege? In particular, I'm sorry, I know this is, I just, this is, I don't know, I apologize for just.
Dang, I thought that was gonna get way more specific, but it got real broad.
I'm sorry. It's very broad. We will get more specific, but
Look, how do we navigate our economic privilege?
yeah, like, so I guess starting with like, and we started talking about this maybe a little bit, but like, maybe we'll start with this, like how how do you decide how to use your economic privilege to ally for others or to support others, and like what are things that me and other folks should be thinking about as we're going through that process of like, especially right now, right? Like thinking about a lot of people are struggling, like how do I assess for myself um how to act within the space of my own privilege.
Oh, you're asking. Okay, you're asking me.
Sorry, there's a lot. There's a lot. I know.
I don't have like one solid answer. Like I'm also
Of
figuring
course, yeah,
out, right? Because for me
yeah.
also my economic privilege shows up in different ways, and I feel like I've only become economically pretty privileged since
Mm-hmm.
the last year.
Mm.
You know what I mean? It's since I became program director of Community Tampa Bay that I don't feel that I feel like my economic privilege supports the lifestyle that I want to enjoy, right? And that's a hugely privileged perspective, just to be able to say that. At the same time, it is not beyond me to acknowledge that I've put myself in this place, right? And it has taken crossing a lot of identity barriers, and it has taken almost not getting here despite having 3 master's degrees and having a gamut of experience that for any person in the majority community would have maybe a fourth of what I have and still be able to have more than what I have in this current moment, right? And so I recognize that fully well, right? So there is privilege in it. It depends on where you are standing, in what space you are standing in. There is certainly a heavy amount of privilege that I enjoy, and I feel no guilt about it or no shame about it because there's no need for that. Like I'm not going to feel ashamed for um the extensive amounts of work that I've put into myself and the extensive amounts of systemic oppression that I've had to overcome to get to this place. And in the same vein, like it's circular, right? In the same vein, I can also recognize, yes, but you were only able to overcome that systemic oppression because of your identities. Does that make sense? As opposed to some other identities. We all have privilege, Masa. It's that simple. We all have privilege, right? And if we concede to making it about ourselves, we will always be burdened by our privilege, which does nobody any good, doesn't help anyone. You trying to figure out whether, like, what is your true motivation? Am I trying to feel superior? Is this my class privilege speaking out? Should I be ashamed of the fact that I can actually provide something to these other humans? By no means does anything good or bad for those humans. At the very least, you did not put food on their plates, which they could have greatly benefited by, right? But all of that is your ish to deal with. You know what I'm saying? And over the years has been my ish to deal with, right? Has all been that's all about me, and like I can deal with that in my space. But at the same time, it's like, look, if I didn't look the way that I looked, I didn't dress the way that I dressed, I didn't, like present myself the way that I presented, I didn't have the accent that I have, I didn't have the vocabulary that I had, people didn't perceive me, I wasn't Indian, let's say. You know what I mean? Like my Black peers probably do not have the same experience that I do. I mean, like I've had these conversations with many of my Black peers. They will tell you that they have not had the same experiences that I've had, right? Even being in a department as progressive of women as progressive as women's in, why am I struggling with this? Women in gender studies, right? I graduated from that program. As progressive as women in gender studies, you saw the racism come through real harsh. You saw my voice being silenced in the light of some others, but at the same time, tokenized and amplified in the face of some others, right? So there's just different spaces in which you occupy privilege and then you don't at the same time, yeah? So do I have white privilege? We're talking about racial privilege now, right? Do I have white privilege that then transcends into that level of socioeconomic privilege that white people experience because by the privilege of their race? No, I don't, right? And at the same time, do I experience anti-Black racism, right? The way that Black folks do? Absolutely not, right? So in one space you are not privileged, in the other space you are privileged. It's a complex fabric. It's not simple by any means, right? But I think if you are consistently willing to do the work, you can find yourself in it. You know, like socioeconomically, if you ask me where I stand in India, I don't know. I haven't done that work. I also don't have the kind of information that I have over here, right? Like real solid information that I can gather from people who are actually within my network. I don't have that kind of information, right? But I think like we all have privilege in some way, shape, or form. We can recognize that, you know? And if we can recognize that, then we can figure out how to leverage that like it's powerful, because it is powerful, you know? Um, I'm not going to be ashamed of the fact, like I said before, coming back to the first part of the conversation, I'm not ashamed of the fact that I make so much money, but I'm responsible with how I use it. You know, Ilhan Omar, in one of her conversations with, you know, like um, one of the late night shows, right? Like Jimmy Fallon or someone like I don't remember which late night show, but she said that they asked her, why did you choose to sit on the budget committee? Because I think like you can choose to be on any one of, you can choose to be on 3 committees or something like that. You can choose to be on which committees you want to be in. She chose to sit on the budget committee. I keep saying community, budget committee. And they asked her why. And she said, well, how we spend our money shows which communities we are invested in. We need to start investing in minority communities. We need to start investing in not the 1%. Fact, how we spend our money shows what we are willing to invest in and what we are not. You know what I'm saying? So like, that's how I use my economic privilege. Like I know I have it, and so I use it, you know, in ways that, and it's not for, again, that whole like guilt piece of it, the saviorship piece of it, right? I think saviorship is so heavily rooted in this terrible idea of martyrdom. You know, like I have to not just do what is comfortable for me. I do what is comfortable for me. I don't find the need to sacrifice what I want from life in order to be able to help others. You know, are there extraneous circumstances, like, are there like heavy circumstances, exigent circumstances where you do make those decisions sometimes and say, yeah, this month I don't need to do this because that person needs a surgery, whatever it is, right? And you help out, of course you do. You know what I'm saying? A few things have changed in my family status recently, right? And so I'm making certain negotiations in my life in order to be able to help them out, right? But it's a negotiation. That's all that it is. It's not anything more than that. You know, like I'm not at a major disadvantage because of it. I won't put myself at a major disadvantage because of it on a regular basis either. You know what I'm saying? For anything, right? I like where I am and I like to be in this particular space. And within this particular space too, I have full capacity to use my privilege to help other people. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, right? But this thing of my bank account is currently at $20, but this person needs $30. So I'm going to give them the $30 and go into that -10, that negative balance, you know, and then feel about myself like, my God, look at how much I helped them. I was willing to go into negative balance for them. Did they ask you to do that? So what's this fairy tale that's happening right now? That where you're romanticizing your their lack of, in order to support their like one time something. You know what I mean? One time that you were able to help them, right? So all of that just reads so, it's just so unnecessary, right? And it feels in the moment, it's what are you trying to do? Because if you do what you need, you do how much ever you can. Would it, if you wanted to help that person with $10, that person's going to value that $10 regardless, because it gets them closer to that 30, you know? But also like, don't put yourself at a disadvantage and then gripe about it until kingdom come. It's not valuable to anybody.
It's interesting because, sorry, I'm going a little bit. It's interesting because this is bringing up for me like my own sort of journey in relationship with money, and like, and I think we've had this conversation about sort of that martyrdom, right? Of like, yeah, that piece of things. Because I think it is something that I've noticed in a lot of in a lot of circles, definitely I would say like more like liberal circles of like this almost aversion to money, right? Like this almost kind of like um I would say like very anti-capitalist rhetoric, and then at the same time, like in a sense, almost like those with privilege, like giving up their privilege as a way of, I don't know, atoning for sins. And like I feel like I had internalized a lot of those messages at different points in my life, where I felt like I shouldn't have, like I shouldn't have like suffer, like almost like like exactly that the term martyrdom is so poignant because poignant and
It's
appropriate
also a
because
very current usage of martyrdom. Okay, there are like multiple historic uses of martyrdom.
yeah,
I'm not trying to delegitimize
yeah,
someone else's martyrship or acts of martyrdom, right?
yeah,
I'm just talking from this current context with
hmm,
the majority liberals that you are speaking of,
yeah,
and it's easy to say you hate money when you have it,
yeah,
you know,
hmm,
um, or when you don't need it,
yeah,
you know. But like I know that I don't like know this. I am fairly confident that no minority community succeeded from the martyrdom of majority communities.
mm,
Other than to feel like, oh, great, so thank you so much for that saviorship. Thank you. I guess I'm
mm,
obligated to you now in some way, shape, or form. This
mm,
has benefited me in no way, but you seem to think it has. So now I guess I am again tied to you
mm,
without choice, without consent.
mm,
Class is so complicated, like everything
mm,
else. I also have really unpopular views, so I don't know if I'll share all of that with you.
mm,
Um, Regarding capitalism and anti-capitalism and the manner in which we treat it,
mm,
feels a little tone deaf, in my opinion,
mm,
my humble opinion. Um, but I'm fairly confident we'll get some solid, non-constructive backlash if I share my views. So I'll keep it to myself. Like I don't need anybody to get on board with me for me to
yeah,
still believe in my beliefs, you know. Um,
yeah.
but I think like that's the complicated piece of it. You were saying about martyrdom. I'm sorry. I feel like I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No. But I think that's the thing is like there is more complexity there, and I think like that's something for me that I've struggled with is that sense of like so, so sorry, this is going to be like a little bit of a tangent anecdote, but like when I was a kid I really liked money. Like I used to collect like change, and like it was like legit like I don't know if you've seen, was it the not DuckTales, but like the Scrooge McDuck, where it has like the money vault with like all the coins. No, okay. Well, there's like he's like has a lot of money and he will like dive into like this money vault. I legit would, yeah. But I legit as a kid, like I'm like 8 years old, like had like tons and tons of pennies, and like I would count them, and like it was like I was like doing math and everything like that because like I was like a nerd at the same time, and I enjoyed that kind of thing. But at the same time, I'm like playing with money, so like I loved money um, as a little kid. And again, it's interesting, kind of like thinking about the fact that like to me, when I was younger, money was a means to be able to get what you wanted and to do, to have agency, to have some power. Um, and then as I got older, I feel like I got other messages where it was like this, again, kind of like that sense of like, no, like we have to get rid of this entirely. Like we have to get rid of the concept of money entirely. And I think there was kind of this very binary way of thinking about things where it wasn't helpful for me in helping me to understand my relationship with my own privilege, right? With in money and in class. Um, and I think that was something that I don't know. I'm like thinking now about also like even like networks and connections with folks too, of like what were some of the things where I let some of those ideas of class end up sort of being like, because you have money, therefore I can't be in the same circle as you. Like there's almost like an internalized sense of that, and I was like, and this sense of like, one, rejecting it for myself, like that martyrdom kind of thing, or like again, this application of that word, but then at the same time also thinking from a standpoint of that judgment call or devaluation, or sense that like if you have um and you if you have at all, then it's like it's that's not good, as opposed to how do we have a relationship with our privilege to recognize and leverage our privilege, as opposed to just denying it, you know.
I mean, I think you're also talking about a very specific circle that thinks that we shouldn't have money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, if you travel with the 1%ers, that's not what they think.
True. Yeah.
Or the people that believe in the 1%ers
Mm-hmm.
and the trickle down effect. And that's not what they think.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think people's relationship, even those humans who like have money, their relationship with money is so conflicted in that they will lead themselves to believe that despite the fact that they're making a significant amount of money, that it's really not that much. You know?
Yeah. I mean, I think I do that for myself.
Do you consider yourself to make a significant amount of money?
Depends on significant. I think relative, right? In terms of relativity.
To what?
Relative to, relative to, I feel like from like that one, like the 1% standpoint, depends on which 1% of like which population, right? Like, are we talking about the world? Are we talking about in the United States? Are we talking about
The 1% in the US.
in the US?
Mm-hmm.
So compared to that, no. And at the same time, I also know that where my economic status is definitely way more comfortable than I would say. Like I'm definitely in like the upper, more comfortable half, for sure.
Of the population?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. I think you need to look at some data.
Okay, I will look at data again, because I feel like I'm like, I don't know. I'm just.
You are not.
Okay.
You're not in the upper most comfortable half.
Okay.
Maybe third.
Oh, say okay.
No, wait.
So I'm in the upper, just I don't know exactly where. No?
Math is such a hard thing for me.
I'm sorry. I'll look at
hard.
the median and blah 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 and all
Yeah,
that
look
stuff.
at the median and see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'll see, because I think partially too, I'm like also thinking from, and again, like the intersections of different things too, of like, and I think this kind of gets back into what you were saying too about like, I think the intersections between economic privilege and then like other identities and how those privileges manifest in different ways. Like I feel like that also has an impact for me, you know?
I don't know how.
No. Like I think
Like I don't make that much money, but I'm a man, so that's okay. Like that.
so. I think that it has an impact on how much I make as well, right? So like,
But you're a man.
mm-hmm.
Do you believe the fact that you're a man currently has an impact on your income? Not from a CTV perspective, just in general.
So I think in general, so one of the things, and this kind of gets into class sort of like in general, because I feel like class, we think of like economic, but then kind of going back to even like education, like this is something that I definitely like have some sensitivity around, but I'm still on my journey on this, but like the idea around education, and like I don't have a degree, you know?
Mm.
And like there are folks who have degrees who have put in investment and work in schooling, um who I have worked alongside, who I might make the same as them, you know? And like there is I know you're making a little bit of
I'm listening. I'm listening. I'm
I
sorry.
know
I'm sorry. My face shouldn't react.
I'm still like, and again, like this is complicated for me, so like I'm still trying to figure this out. So like
Okay.
I know I don't necessarily like I'm not at a final place obviously at all with any of this, but like it is something that like I simultaneously I I don't know, like there is still some of that internalization of like what is my value based off of some of these other elements and indicators of class, in a sense, you know?
Mm.
That and even if I don't try to put that on anybody else, the fact that I'm putting it on myself, um I have to explore, because if I'm putting it on myself, how am I not putting it on other people as well, you know? Like in terms of if I'm devaluing myself based off of my education status, am I looking at other people and saying that same thing, even
Right.
if I'm not fully conscious of it? But so I'm definitely exploring this area still, but um
So, how do your other identities impact your past and present incomes? How have you witnessed them impacting your past and present incomes? Class is not something that a lot of people intentionally explore.
mhm.
So I understand that this conversation is a little bit more difficult than other identities
Yeah.
that present themselves as who you are,
Hmm.
not what you do or what you earn
Yeah.
or how you live.
um so I think I'm going to start maybe not so much with a what I earn piece,
Mm-hmm.
um but what I will start with is I think the intersection with um my mom, and kind of my experience with her. Um, so, and I remember, so I'm using this as kind of like a starting point of thinking about this. Um, I remember very specifically there was a lot of conversation at a certain point, when I was taking care of my mom. She was sick with cancer. And so she was receiving a lot of support. She was not working. I was living with her, like basically like helping to support, like pay mortgage and everything like that. Um, and at the same time, like she was getting a lot of um, like Pinellas County support in terms of like health services and like hospice care and things like that, right? So like um, both from a government level and then also from like community organization level, um, that was helping to pay for like medical bills and to make sure that she can get chemo and like all that. And in that process, and she was also receiving like food stamps and like all this stuff. So like lots of different services, welfare, right? Welfare. And there was a lot of conversation, um, that that is always happening, but I was keen to, in particular at that time, that I remember folks talking about welfare systems and criticizing folks who are on welfare, and specifically responding with, hey, like, you know, my mom, you know, like this is like she is part of that community of folks who are receiving support, who don't have the amount of economic support, right, that she needs in order to continue living, and for me to also continue living, because like there was no way that I could quit my job and like care for her full time and things like that. Like there was a lot of things that we had to do in order to make that work. But the attitude toward that was, no, she's fine, it's these other folks. And I think that's where it gets into that intersection of the inner economic, where it's like her economic needs are justified because of her whiteness, because of the unique intersection of our identities that made it so that we are acceptable for receiving that economic support. Whereas other communities, because of their identities, it is, and it might not be, it's not, again, it's not isolated to just economics, but because of the intersection of anti-blackness and like immigrant, you know, immigration, anti, you know, just anti anyone who's not white, you know, in a sense, um, the tone completely changes, the attitude completely changes, the support completely changes. I don't know, I can't, and again, I can't say this is a definite. And based off of that, it is hard for me to not see how that could have an impact on, when you have limited resources, who gets that support, right? If you have folks like that who might be in a position of deciding who gets, or from a policy level in terms of like, you know, what are the requirements for receiving, you know, some of these economic supports, how are those decisions being made? And again, I don't know all the answers to that, but like, but I feel like that is one of the things that I definitely saw in a lot of those conversations around policy, is definitely for sure a preference toward certain populations, even if the economic status technically is the same. The other identities definitely had an impact on attitude in terms of like how that is distributed.
So I want to be clear, like I have no doubt that that identity impacts economic privilege. I have
Yeah.
no doubt about that whatsoever. But since this is not a conversation solely on systemic discrimination, and
Yeah.
it's a conversation about our personal experiences with systems as well, right? I'm imploring you to explore the fact that, yes, as a man, had you been working in any other space or in any other community, you probably would have received a lot more privilege than you do here. Right. But I think also internalizing, because I would have received privilege in other spaces, I am either going to, in some way, shape, or form, give up my privilege in this space. Again, is that same thing that you were alluding to, that white liberals do.
Gotcha.
Do you hear what I'm saying?
I see, yeah.
And I don't see how that is beneficial to anybody, you or otherwise.
Gotcha. I'll continue to explore that.
Because yes, as a man, you will be given a significant amount of gender privilege in many other spaces, for sure. You will get jobs easier. You will get more money for the same job that somebody who is just as qualified or probably more qualified than you, who does not identify as a man, will not receive, right? You will receive multiple levels of privilege in various spaces that you will work in. I'm definitely not indicating that identity does not affect economic privilege. If anything, identity is the only thing that affects economic privilege, right? Including your class, right? And those indicators that you were talking about, education, you know, and with that, class privilege also comes with racial privilege, so on and so forth. The assumptions that someone is of a certain class because of who they are, how they identify, so on and so forth, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it is valuable, I think it is valuable to notice where those privileges are happening and where those privileges are not happening also, and to not necessarily, I think there's misinformation when you say, yes, of course I receive privilege in this space,
Mm-hmm.
right? When you actively don't, and you actively don't because of where you work or who you work with. It's not
Mm-hmm.
because of you necessarily.
Okay. Yeah.
Dude, you work with two very powerful women,
That's true. Yeah.
both of whom have much higher economic privilege than you do,
Mm-hmm.
right? Your gender will never play a decision in the raise that I give you or in the promotion that you get from me.
Mm-hmm.
You will not receive privilege from me because you are a man, ever. But that is not because of you. That is because of Tammy and me. And
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
in this space.
So and I think that gives a great example of like how to interrupt systems, for sure.
But also recognize who is doing the interrupting.
Yes.
Check your privilege. See what I mean?
Yeah.
It's very easy to get caught up in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And then like guilt looks like guilt to you, but pride to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So if you're like, oh my God, I have so much guilt, and I'm like, why are you so proud about that? How many times have I asked you that question?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I feel so bad about this. Okay, why are you sharing? Feel bad about it? Isn't it just best kept to yourself?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, or I did this. It's so hard on me that I did this. Great. Who wants to know? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like those pieces, to you look a certain way, to someone else who's of a minority community and who has been on the receiving end of that saviorship looks very differently. You know? So we want to make sure that our privilege doesn't show in those ways too. Right? To have the opportunity to have shame and work through it. To have the opportunity to have shame and have the time to work through it while the rest of the world is burning is privilege.
Yeah.
To have the opportunity to have guilt and do the same
Mm-hmm.
while the rest of the world is burning is the same, right? So in the same vein, right, that whole who you are in this space and your economic privilege and blah blah blah, all of that, right, and your identity coming into perspective, it is valuable to think who is interrupting those systems.
Mm-hmm.
And how that comes into play. No offense, bro, but that's not you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, because I've been in a different space where I feel like because of where I was, that, and again, I'm not bringing that interruption. I'm still the same person coming into a different space, but that space just didn't, the people in that space didn't interrupt that.
Right.
And that was intersecting also with whiteness and certain ideas around class and race and different things like that as well.
Right. Right. Sorry, my pride came into that a little bit.
No. But that's kind of basically what, in a sense, partially my question, right, was, because this is I think valuable as I continue to navigate this for myself, so that I can decenter myself in that process, you know. Because I think especially right now, like as we're thinking about you know, a lot of folks, the world is burning, right? Like in so that is something that yeah, it's always important to think about, and there is a lot of extra pressure right now for a lot of folks. So I know that I want to think clearly. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of thinking to do. It's not like, I know from this conversation, it sounds like I got class, you know, like I nailed it on class, like I know the things and I live my life accordingly. Absolutely don't, you know, like historically, class represents very, very strangely within my family dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
It's a strange intersection in the sense that it's not complex, it's just complicated. A lot of very strange intersections with that, and then like, but at the same time, like I also know I don't have that lack of privilege at all, where I feel like if something happened and I lost, so for example, if I lost my job now, right, I can't go back to India because everything's closed, right? There are no flights back to India, like entry and exit are closed, right? But I still know that despite the fact that my family is in a certain position, they'll still be able to support me.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I'm supporting them right now, if push comes to shove, they'll be able to reroute and support me right back.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like something they'll be able to do. I know that. Like I know I'll never be in a situation where I can't pay rent. I know I'll never be in a situation where I might have to give up my car, things like that, right? But I know I'll never be in a situation where I'm housing insecure or food insecure.
Mm-hmm.
That's massive privilege to have, especially in time of a global pandemic, man, and a global crisis, you know? So things that my mom's side of the family are from the highest class in Hindu society, right? My dad's side of the family, not so much, you know? So it's a really complicated combination between those two as well, in terms of being raised and what the relationship with money looks like. My mom's side of the family has a lot, they've always had a lot of money and a lot of land. Mad problematic because they are one of the most elitist classes and castes in Hindu community, in Hindu society, right? So you can see the heavy level of issue with that. My dad's side of the family had new money for a certain amount of time, and so their relationship with money is to constantly chase it to the detriment of our family, right? They have a very toxic relationship with money, you know? So in both angles, there's a safety in it, in knowing that because they're always chasing after money, and it's a toxic relationship with money, there is money. Because they've always had money, there is money, regardless. You know what I'm saying? So there's, on both sides, there's still money. But I think the question is, how do you need to reconstruct? We still live in a capitalist society, right? We should be moving to a non-capitalist society. I don't know what kind of non-capitalist society yet. I don't have a clear idea on what I would like for that to look like. And it's really not up to me, you know what I mean? Because I feel like with my levels of privilege, I'll be fine regardless, right? It's really with all the humans who don't have healthcare, who are in low economic income strata, so on and so forth. Those are the people that should inform what kind of non-capitalist society we should have, right? And so I don't know what that trajectory looks like, but whatever it looks like, I forgot where I was going. What did I start with?
But to deconstruct our current relationship
with money. So until that happens, it's not going to be an overnight shift. Especially like looking at how politics is right now and things like that. It's not going to be an overnight shift. We're going to live with this, I feel. Even like if we get like a full-on progressive president 8 years down the line, you know, it's still going to take time for them to change an entire system, like hundreds of years of changing a system, right? And so I think it depends on how we choose to deconstruct and then redefine our relationship with money and what that can look like as well. That's not going to change systems. I'm not saying that's going to change system, or simply because we redefine our relationship with money, capitalism is not going to exist. Of course it's going to exist. You know, that's a systemic change that needs to happen. But in the process, in order to be better humans who support our community, in order to be better advocates, solidarity, so on and so forth, you know, to ensure that we are using our economic privilege as a support mechanism for the movement, as a support mechanism for the revolution. The revolution comes, it's coming. When it comes, you know, if we are fighting a capitalist system, we're slightly going to have to fight them with their own tools. Right, with their own weaponry. For that, we're going to need humans with economic privilege. So if we restructure our relationship with money, I think we will be able to more effectively, for lack of a better term, hopefully I don't get into trouble for using this, weaponize our economic
Mhm.
privilege for the better.
I feel like that's a great place to end this.
I think so. This
Yeah.
was well complicated. No, I feel like we barely talked about. I feel like we barely talked about anything, and yet we talked about so much.
I mean,
It's a
to be
lot.
fair, I was a little bit all over the place with how I started. It was a bit broad. So and again, but
I think it was
um,
a great question.
a
No,
lot
I
of
think
things to
that's a
think
good place
about.
to start.
A lot of things to think about for sure, though. So
Yeah, lots of stuff.
appreciate it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Masa.
All right.
Good.
End the record. Yeah. All right.